Adobe and Figma are breaking up, and the consequences of this breakup are going to have massive industry-wide changes. What's going on, and why do I think it's going to be so impactful? Let's talk about it. If you're not already familiar, in September of last year, Adobe announced their plans to acquire Figma for $20 billion. Yes, $20 billion. Dylan, the CEO of Figma, is one of the best leaders in the creative industry, and I was honestly hopeful for what it would look like for him to be at Adobe. He was in the running for next CEO of Adobe for me, and I really think he had a chance at that role. Sadly, that's not going to be happening, as Dylan says here. After 15 months of intense review, Adobe and Figma have decided to end their merger as they don't see a path for a regulatory approval of the deal. Figma and Adobe have reached a joint decision to end our pending acquisition. It's not the outcome we had hoped for, but despite thousands of hours spent with regulators around the world detailing differences between our businesses, our products, and the markets we serve, we no longer see a path towards regulatory approval of the deal. To break this down more simply, the EU saw Adobe and Figma as competitors, and as such, they saw this acquisition as a market merge that was kind of monopolistic. And while I kind of see that, it's important to understand how different Figma's approach was from what Adobe was doing, and to me, it felt like a truly unique product. Nobody who should be using Figma was happily using Adobe's products, and since Figma was so different, I think it fit well within Adobe's model of having multiple tools for specific purposes, like are Illustrator and Photoshop competing? Kind of, but not really. That all said, it is important to have market diversity, and I understand where the EU is coming from when it pushes back on things like this, but it's still really scary. For the last 15 months, while all of this was going on, Figma was ramping up on a lot of different projects that were largely inspired by the amount of opportunity and, let's be frank, money that they had as a result of the Adobe potential acquisition. And now that that's not happening, they're kind of left out in the dust, which sucks because they're working on really cool things like their AI features, the dev mode stuff, and so much more. Thankfully, Figma's not totally out to dry here. They are getting a $1 billion fall-through fee. When deals like this happen, there's usually if one party backs out, the other party gets paid up front. This is actually how Ninja made so much money off the Mixer deal. And we can see here in this mutual agreement that the company will make a cash payment to Figma in the previously agreed amount of $1 billion. Insane. Good for them. Well deserved. That said, I don't think this is a fair move for the market, and it says a lot about what exits are going to look like for companies going forward. We take a look at the numbers that George posted here. Figma's adoption is significantly higher than everything else in the industry. Specifically, their primary versus secondary split here is the best in the industry. Even something like Sketch, which has a decent number of users, the majority of its users are using it as a secondary tool, not the primary tool. Figma won at this. And yes, Adobe XD is here. It's the second most popular solution. It's pretty bad and kind of being left out to dry. But now it's going to have to come back to compete. The issue I see here is that Figma built a massive, successful business. And part of building a successful business is the opportunity to sell that business. I don't know what Figma's path forward is after something like this. If they can't sell to Adobe, they kind of have to IPO because there aren't other businesses where acquiring Figma makes more sense. Like Google doesn't have a reason to acquire them. Facebook doesn't have a reason to acquire them. Amazon doesn't have a reason to acquire them. There's a thin line between acquiring competition and acquiring assets that fit your business's goals. And if Adobe can't buy Figma, I don't know who can. This kind of spells a death sentence for the unicorn acquisition, where a company is purchased for $1 billion or more by another company. And that's scary. It's very common for companies to try and be acquired by others in their general space when they solve a problem for a set of their users really well. When I see this chart, what I see is that Figma identified a real need, which was designing products using good design software. And Adobe wasn't serving that well because Photoshop was not meant for designing applications. Adobe's quick attempt to make something, XD, wasn't going great. And that's why Figma found the market it did. I am concerned they won't be able to properly profit off of that now if they're unable to exit. I'm scared about the precedent this sets for 2024 in the world of startups and tech companies, where if you can't sell the thing you built, what do you do then? That's all I got. If you want to hear more about how Figma is building things for developers, I'll pin a video in the corner all about that. Appreciate y'all a ton as always. I'll see you in the next one. Peace, nerds.